Good morning, everybody. We're here to hear from Liz Menkes, who is going to discuss the dangers of Wi-Fi and other EMFs, plus simple steps to create a healthier home. Liz Menkes is a professional EMF consultant in the San Francisco Bay Area and one of only a few certified building biology environmental consultants, building biologists in the country. She's also certified Electromagnetic Radiation Specialist, having completed an advanced training program. Liz has been doing EMF home and office inspections since 2011. I just wanted to remind everybody that we cannot do any live streaming in here, periscoping or videotaping. And do you have a book you're going to present? Okay, but you'll be available for questions. She'll be available for questions after, but she'll also have time during her presentation to do Q&A. Thank you, everybody. Here's Liz.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about this topic. And the good news is that there are solutions. And you can almost always have a low EMF home. So what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to talk to you, what are the different EMFs that are found in homes? What are they caused by? What are the concerns? And then what can you do about them? So first I'd like to tell you just a little bit about building biology, which is where I got my training and certification. Building biology started after World War II in Germany when homes were being rebuilt that were making people ill, for example, from toxic paints. So it's the holistic study of how the built environment affects human health. And building biology has three areas of focus: indoor air quality, healthy building construction, and EMFs. So I got the full certification, but my focus is on EMFs. And from the building biology perspective, nature is the gold standard. So what are EMFs? So every electrical device emits an electromagnetic field. And they're in a wave formation. And each wave is a cycle, and it's also called a hertz. So you might have heard, for example, of 60 hertz. That's 60 waves or 60 cycles per second. There's what's called the electromagnetic spectrum. And these different fields are classified by their frequency or number of cycles. So you start out at the very low end with extremely low frequencies. And an example of that is power lines. And I'm going to talk more about these different frequencies. But you go up the spectrum, and then you get to microwaves, which is another word for wireless. And then you go to X-rays and gamma rays. So we use, in our work, we use the term EMF as a general catch-all for several different kinds of man-made electromagnetic fields. And there's 4 kinds of EMFs that we look at when we go into a home. I'm going to focus on radio frequency or wireless for this presentation because that's the one that's been exponentially increasing over the past few years. But I want you to have the bigger picture to see the different kinds of things that can affect you in your home. So I'm going to briefly go over the other 3 as well. So AC magnetic fields, these are 60 hertz and extremely low frequency, and common sources are high voltage power lines as well as faulty wiring in your home. So the example here, the picture of those high voltage lines, that would cause many people to, sit up and say, I wonder if that's an issue in my home. But not many people are aware that the wiring in their home, if it's faulty, could also create very high magnetic fields. I had a client once who she'd had chronic fatigue for 10 years, And she had been a nationally ranked rower, and it was all she could do to get out of bed to teach a part-time yoga class. She had this chronic fatigue, non-specific anxiety, really difficulty sleeping. And when I came into her home and I turned on my meters, there were really high magnetic fields in her bedroom and her kitchen and her family room. And when we turned off temporarily the breaker that was affecting her bedroom, that night she said she slept better than she had in years. And over the next couple of weeks, as the wiring was fixed, there had been a major remodel on her home. And when they did the remodel 10 years prior, they had redone the wiring and had made some errors. So over the next couple of weeks, as the wiring was fixed, she was reporting that she was starting to regain her strength and her stamina. So that's an example of how how one kind of EMF can affect people. It was classified as a 2B carcinogen by the World Health Organization in 2001 because of increased risk for childhood leukemia. And that was based on epidemiological studies of hundreds of thousands of people who live near these high voltage power lines. The next one is AC electric fields. And we kind of joke and we say, this is the EMF that no one's ever heard of. And this comes from wiring in your walls and cords that are plugged in. And it's always present as long as the breakers are on. And this one is also 60 hertz, like magnetic fields. The best way to understand the difference between magnetic fields and electric fields is to compare it to the water system in your house. So you've always got water pressure there. And that's like electric fields. They're always there as long as the breakers are turned on. And with your water system, water only flows when you turn on the faucet. Well, magnetic fields are only there when current flows. So these electric and magnetic, they're measured differently, they have different sources, and they're mitigated differently. One example, I had a client who called me out and she said that she just was sleeping horribly. She could feel like electricity running through her body. She would have nightmares. And what I found was that her bed happened to be on the shared wall with another unit. So she had the wiring for her unit in that wall, plus she had the wiring for the adjoining unit in that wall, and she had really high electric fields. So all we did, we moved the bed to the other side of the room, and we did a couple of other things to reduce electric fields, and then she reported that she was sleeping fine after that. So electric fields suppress melatonin production. So this is the one that we tend to associate with difficulty sleeping. All the EMFs seem to affect people's sleep, but especially electric fields. And one of the risk factors for Alzheimer's and breast cancer is low levels of melatonin. So you can see how there could be the link between electric fields and these diseases. Dirty electricity. So dirty electricity, that's high frequency spikes that ride along on the wiring in your walls. And it's created by what we call AC, or alternating current. So anything that uses AC, like your toaster or your TV, your refrigerator, anything that uses AC is going to produce some dirty electricity. So every house has it to some degree. But certain things produce more of it than others. For example, compact fluorescent lights, dimmer switches, heavy motors, and solar inverters. Solar inverters are actually a really big producer, one of the biggest that I see in homes. And not only can it be your own solar, but it could actually be your neighbor's solar. Because you're on the same grid, you're sharing electricity, and so I can find very high levels when the home next door has solar, as an example. There's solutions for this. Oh, as an example, I had one client who she'd had a chronic rash over her whole body for over a year, and she'd been to about 10 doctors, and nothing was working. They were telling her it was an autoimmune disease, and I came to her house, and I did find that there were very high levels of dirty electricity that were coming from outside her home. And she told me that a year before that, her neighbor had installed solar. Now, I never know if that's the cause or not. But all I could do was, there's a fairly simple way that you can block dirty electricity from the grid. And so she did that, and within a week, her rash started to get better, and within a couple of months, it was significantly improved, and I believe it's completely gone now. So for solar, what we've found is there's some microinverters that we've tested. So if you're thinking of getting solar, there's different kinds of inverters. There's what's called a string inverter, and the inverter is what converts it from DC to AC. So a string inverter is where you have one inverter in your garage that handles it all. And then microinverters are where each of the panel has its own inverter. And there's a couple of models we found that produce no discernible levels of dirty electricity. The end phase M215 and M250 were no discernible dirty electricity. There may be others that also don't produce dirty electricity, but these are the ones that we've tested. And just because one model by a company is good, it doesn't necessarily mean that another model is good. It really needs to be tested. So the main area that I want to focus on today is wireless or radio frequency. So why should you be concerned? In 2011, the World Health Organization classified radio frequency as a 2B carcinogen. That's a possible human carcinogen due to increased risk for brain tumors. It's in the same category as lead and DDT and gasoline fumes. And last year, there was a $25 million, the National Toxicology Program released part of the results of a $25 million study where rats were exposed to wireless radiation, cell phone radiation. And they were exposed intermittently, 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off, and then not at night when they were sleeping. And after only 2 years of this exposure, 1 in 12 male rats got either a brain tumor, a heart tumor, or a precancerous lesion. And none of the rats in the control study got the cancer. And normally it takes at least 10 years for a tumor to develop. So this shows you how quickly and how conducive wireless is to these types of effects. They actually didn't think that it would show positive results. They were surprised, and this did actually get quite a bit of play in the media. U.S. medical groups have spoken out. The California Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Environmental Medicine have all called for a reduction in exposures. They've issued letters or passed resolutions in this regard. So what does the science say? One of my favorite sources of information is the BioInitiative report. And a group of the world's leading EMF researchers, scientists, and doctors, they got together and they reviewed all the studies to date. And the latest BioInitiative report was 2012, and they reviewed close to 4,000 studies. And this group of reviewers had no ties to industry. And so this is regarded as independent and true. And the full report is about 500 pages, but there's what's called the summary for the public, which is only about 18 pages. And I have a link to that on my website, which is emfhealthy.com. So the bioinitiative report has various chapters, and they'll say where they show effects, where they don't show effects, where it's conclusive, or where the evidence may be weak. So again, it's truly regarded as independent. So there's a chapter on evidence of damage to sperm and reproduction. And damage to sperm is some of the lowest levels of exposure can cause damage to sperm. And where do guys keep their cell phones? Right in their pocket. Evidence of autism. I work with, the doctor who did the chapter on autism is Dr. Martha Herbert of Harvard University, and she's regarded as one of the leading experts in the country. She's a pediatric neurologist, regarded as one of the leading experts in the country on autism. So that's an example of the caliber or the type of person who's doing this review. And I work with a doctor in Walnut Creek, Dr. Toril Gelter, who happens to be here in the audience. She's a pediatrician, and she's had quite a bit of success with her autistic patients by reducing down their exposures to wireless in their home. So there's another chapter, evidence of brain tumors, evidence of leukemia, evidence of Alzheimer's. And the thing that's even of more concern is it's cumulative. So somebody who's 70, they might have only been exposed for 20 years to this. But we have people now in their 50s, we're seeing more and more early onset Alzheimer's, and this could be a factor. And what about children who are starting off at a really young age being exposed to this? Evidence of DNA damage, evidence of breast cancer. You can read the summary for the public and get more information. So what are the symptoms? And before I go over this, I want to say that these are very general symptoms that can have many different sources. And even if I go into a home and I find really high exposures and my client has a number of these symptoms, I can never say that this is the cause of their symptoms. All I can do is say, reduce them down and see what happens. So I've ordered these in what I tend to see most common, but difficulty sleeping is probably number one. And difficulty sleeping, fatigue, muscle weakness, concentration, brain fog, memory, learning issues. These I see over and over from my clients. And then headaches, irritability, anxiety, the ringing in the ears, heart palpitations. I see various combinations of these. And if you have a couple of these, there's a good chance that you may have an overexposure of EMFs in your environment. And just continuing, skin rashes, facial flushing, dizziness, balance problems, eye pain, pressure in your head, sharp stabbing pains, body pain, leg cramps, nosebleed, nausea, flu-like symptoms, hyperactivity, especially in children. Sometimes I go into a home and the people are like I feel like they're just ready to like jump off the wall. They're so hyper. And even when I'm there and I'm shutting things down to do the analysis, sometimes they'll say, "Wow, what did you do?" I really noticed that. They'll feel sometimes just this sort of calming when we make those changes. So some people think that, well, the issue with brain tumors, maybe we'll know in 5 years if this is really true or not. But electrical sensitivity, I try and tell people, it's really a here and now issue. It's affecting people now. It's recognized by the ADA, and one of the best sources of information is Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe's report on electrical sensitivity. She's a medical doctor in England, and this is posted on my website also. And the first 4 pages show the findings of her report, so you can quickly see a summary of what it's all about. And then it's an 80-page report, and the rest of it is her sources. So it's estimated about 30% of the population is moderately sensitive to EMFs. Like they may have a little bit of difficulty sleeping or maybe a little headaches, difficulty concentrating, but they just haven't connected the dots that it might be an EMF issue. And then about 3% of the population are reported to be extremely sensitive. And by that point, they know it. They can feel, when they're around people with cell phones, they can feel the sharp stabbing pains. And they have real trouble working at a computer, being in an office where there's Wi-Fi. So I see the majority of my clients are very electrical sensitive. And by the time they get to me, they've often tried conventional medicine. They've looked at mold and pesticides and chemicals and diet, and it hasn't worked. And then that's usually where they call me. And then some people just want to have a healthier home for their family. But the majority of people are either electrical sensitive or who have some kind of serious health issue. So here are some common red flags that you may have a home that has very high EMFs of one sort or another. So, is a member of your family or household very techie? And if they are, they tend to bring in the latest gadgets into their home. They've got boosters and they've got all kinds of things, and I just find really high levels throughout the house. Do you live in a condo or apartment? And the issue here is that you're in very close proximity to your neighbors. So your wireless router is a very strong emitter. And then you've got your neighbor's wireless routers. It can be next door on the adjoining units. It can be above you. It can be below you. So that can be a real issue and a challenge for people who live in condos. But most of the time it can be addressed and it can be shielded, sometimes relatively easily. Do you have solar? We already talked about that one. Do you live in an older home, pre-1940s? There's what's called knob and tube wiring, which was installed pre-1940s. And this type of wiring, the wires are they're separate. And so they don't cancel each other out as well, and so there can be higher magnetic fields in those homes. Do you live high on a hill? Sometimes people think these beautiful homes at the top of the hill are the best homes, but I always dread when I get called to a home at the top of a hill, because those homes tend to be in more direct line to the cell antennas, and they can just have really high exposure from the cell towers, and they can even be 3/4 of a mile away. And it just surprises me sometimes how strong it can be in their home from those cell towers. Also, radar is another one in the Bay Area. When I'm up in the hills like Tiburon or Sausalito, I can pick up really high radar, and that can be from Doppler or airport, or it can be things like military offshore. I don't necessarily know the source of it, I just pick it up, and that can also be shielded. And you live near long-distance, high-voltage power lines. So in addition to long-distance, high-voltage power lines, some cities that have older grids, like San Francisco or Berkeley, if you'll notice, they'll have those really thick cables that run along the sidewalk, and they can be really close to the homes. Those older grids aren't designed as well, and so I can find high magnetic fields in those homes as well. Here are some common sources of radio frequency. So cell phones, cell towers, wireless routers, cordless phones. Most people might have heard of that maybe their cell tower might be an issue, but they have no idea that that cordless phone in their house is actually a very strong emitter. It's the base station that's emitting constantly, whether you're using the phone or not. And when you pick it up, it's like either the extension or the base station. It's like using a cell phone. Smart meters. Smart meter is the round electrical meter that's on the side of your house that measures your electricity. And depending where it's located, it can be an issue. If it's like on a garage and it's far away from the sleeping areas or where you spend much time, it's probably not much of an issue. But if it's on a bedroom wall, or you have a bank, if there's a bank of smart meters on a bedroom wall, like in apartment units, that can be a really serious issue. Baby monitors. Baby monitors are one of the ones that break my heart when I go into homes because they're very powerful and they're usually very close to the baby. You know, the baby crib might be in the middle of the room and there's the baby monitor sitting, 4 feet away. And it's a very powerful emitter. I did recently discover one baby monitor that's really low RF. It's Angel Care. They have an eco or low RF baby monitor, and I discovered this in a client's home, and I go up to it and it's really low. I'm just getting a little bit measured from it, and by the time I was about 8 feet away, it was very, very low, even insignificant. And what he told me is that it only emits when the baby cries. So then I understood what was going on. So that's what I would recommend instead of a regular baby monitor. TVs, most TVs now have internet, and so when those are turned on, they can also be emitting a high level of radiation. And many people have these TVs right in their bedroom, so they're getting high exposure while they're sleeping. Computers, iPads, laptops, computers, anything that's Wi-Fi enabled is putting out a strong signal. So now, common misperceptions. It's everywhere. There's nothing I can do. I hear that many times from people. And it is true. It is everywhere. It's here in this room. I'm using this one might be hardwired, I'm not sure. But it's not true that there's nothing you can do, because you can control it in your own home. And that's where it's the most important, especially in the sleeping areas. Because if you have a low EMF sleeping area, that gives your body the opportunity to heal and repair and to be able to deal with the exposures that you might be getting during the day. Another common misconception actually is that cell towers are the biggest issue when it comes to wireless exposure. Many times people call me out to their home and they're concerned about the cell tower down the street, and I find that about 95% of the time the biggest exposures are the devices within people's own homes. I don't have a particular focus on any one device or system. I just go in and I take the measurements and I let people know what the concern levels are and where they're coming from. Sometimes it is the cell tower, but most often it's not. So what about 5G? 5G is 5th generation, and this is very high frequency waves. They're called millimeter waves, and it's higher frequency than what's currently used for any of the cellular services. So it travels a shorter distance, and so the industry is going to need more sites. I've heard anywhere from 1 antenna every 12 housing units. So we could be we just don't have enough information at this point to know what the effects will be, but it's a really big concern. And in California, there's a bill, SB 649, and a woman was just talking with me about that before we started. This would give carriers much more control in the public rights-of-way. And it's passed the Senate, and it's passed the House, and it's to the governor for signature. So we can't control that. So all we can do is be aware of the issue, and if it does happen, do your best to keep your family safe and to shield if need be. So what can you do now? What are the solutions? So first of all, I want to give you an idea of what the numbers mean. So you'll have an idea when I'm talking about various devices. So the building biology extreme concern range is over 1,000 microwatts per meter squared. So if you've got a Wi-Fi enabled computer and a wireless router in your home, like in your office, which is what I see in most homes, and if that wireless router is close to your desk, you're probably getting anywhere from 25,000 to, I've measured as high as 70,000 microwatts per meter squared right by someone's desk. So this tends to be an extremely high area of exposure. And then sometimes they'll have the cordless phone right on the desk too. So they've got the wireless router here, cordless phone here, and they're right in the middle. And then the computer itself, I typically measure most either iPads, laptops, or Wi-Fi enabled computers. If you're about 2 feet from it, I'm getting about 20,000. So think about all the children who are using iPads to play and people sitting at their computers and getting this exposure. So the good news is you can use hardwired Ethernet cable instead of wireless. And then you turn off the Wi-Fi on your computer or your laptop and you just plug in. And then you're not getting any of this exposure. And some people, I just give people options. And some people don't want to turn off their Wi-Fi. So anything you can do if you move it further away from you, that's a good thing. The signal drops off quickly, so we say that distance is your friend. And even iPads can be hardwired. Even though they don't have an Ethernet port, there's a way to do that. And we recommend that you use a corded phone and make sure that it doesn't say DECT on it, because you might be fooled. There are some corded phones that are sold that actually are still emitting wireless. They have extensions in other rooms that can be used wirelessly. So there's a phone that I generally like to recommend. It's AT&T's CL4940. That's the model. And you can buy it online. It's got caller ID and speakerphone and answering machine. So that's the one that I like a lot. So the next one is opt-out or shield smart meter, depending where it's located. There's something called a smart meter guard, which I like, which does a really good job of shielding. I believe there's different kinds of guards that can be placed over the smart meter, but this is the one I happen to like.
Where did you get this?
It's a company called smartmeterguard.com. I've also had good luck with my clients if they get it. So if, let's say, the smart meter is right on the neighbor's garage, which is facing your bedroom, then that can be an issue for you. And I've had success with neighbors getting a smart meter guard and then giving it to their neighbor. I actually did that for my neighbor. And you can opt out and pay PG&E an opt-out fee. And it lasts for about 3 years, and then you don't have to pay for it anymore. And that's in California. It's different in different states. And then avoid using baby monitors, as I mentioned. A few other things I want to mention. Xbox 360 emits all the time, even if it's turned off. So if you've got that in your child's room, unplug it at night. And also the controllers for these games, where do they keep them? Right in their lap. So I recommend a corded controller. And use your cell phone more safely. So distance, anything you can do to keep it further away from you is a good thing, and it just helps. So you want to keep it away from your body when it's turned on. There's also there's some cases that are sold, and I like to recommend this for, especially for guys, because where do they put it but in their pocket? And there's some cases that are sold that are shielded on the front, but they're not shielded on the back of the phone. So you can put it in your pocket with the front of the phone facing your body. You can still get the call coming in from the back of the phone. I would say avoid cases that are fully enclosed, because then the phone is just working harder to get out, and it just becomes a self-defeating purpose. But I like a case that's sold by rfsafe.com. But I'm sure there's others that are very good as well. Use a speaker, phone, text, or an air tube headset. Oftentimes people think that if they're not holding it right to their ear, that they're fine. But they're actually still getting a very high exposure. And remember, the rats in that study, National Toxicology Program, they were not holding the cell phone to their ear. And so a typical cell phone, if I'm standing at about this distance, an iPhone, I'll get about 15,000 to 20,000. And remember, 1,000 is microwatts per meter squared is the extreme concern range. So, and many people keep it by their bed, or teens, they keep it under their pillow. So now that you know, you can help keep your children safer. So you want to keep it away from your bedside unless it's in airplane mode. If it's in airplane mode, then it's not emitting a signal, and you can still use it as an alarm clock. This is one of my favorite things to do. When you're at home, you can forward your cell phone to a corded phone when you're at home, and then turn off your cell phone, so you can basically take all your calls on a safe corded landline. The other thing you can do is you can forward text messages to your computer, so that you can be reading your text from your computer rather than having to use your cell phone. And of course, when you go out in public, what you can do is keep it turned off most of the time, or airplane mode, and then turn it on every couple of hours and then check it. So these are all things, and everybody needs it for different purposes, different kind of work. So anything you can do to reduce your exposures is a good thing. I've measured many different cell phones, and it depends how many apps people have. Some of them might just ping maybe every 30 seconds to the cell tower, and it's emitting a strong signal. And I've measured some cell phones that are emitting, literally it's just constant, even when they're not in use, because of what that person happens to have set up on their phone. You want to avoid using your cell phone when you're in a car, bus, or train, if at all possible, because metal, it will reflect back off the metal, so it can actually increase the exposures in the car. So I tell people any reduction in exposures is worth doing. And just take it one step at a time and try and just maybe hardwire your computer or get a corded phone. And I also recommend, if you're trying to turn things off and reduce your exposures in your home, get an inexpensive, simple radio frequency meter so that you can know if things are really turned off. And like Cornet makes an inexpensive meter, Acousticom is another good one, that you'll know if things are turned off or not. I had someone call me and he said, no, I'm using the old DSL. I know that I'm not using any wireless in my house. Everything's fine. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm not going to find very much. And I walk in, and sure enough, he had no idea, even though he plugged in the cords to make it hardwired, if you don't turn it off the devices themselves, they're still emitting just like they were before. So it really wasn't really doing any good to have that Ethernet connection. So that kind of a meter can help you verify that these things are really off. So thank you, and now we'll open it up for questions.
Have you heard of the BioZen for the cell phones, and they take out any radiation or EMFs?
Okay, so there's many of these devices that are advertised as changing the waves to a more healthy wave. There are these things that you can put on your cell phone. There's pendants, there's home harmonizers, things like that. I can't measure any difference with my meters, so I can't recommend them one way or another. In your home, I always recommend, when you're in your home, to reduce the exposures. I would never say that one of those is a substitute for reducing your exposures. Some of my clients who are extremely sensitive, I've heard some people say, for example, oh, this device works really well, it's helped me and nothing else has helped me. And this has helped many of my friends. And then I've had other clients try that same thing, and they don't notice anything different. So something might work for one person, it might not work for another person, but unless you can actually feel the difference, and make sure it can be returned.
So you've actually tried the BioZen? Because I've heard that that's the only one that works.
Yeah. None of these will make a difference on my meter, but I have my meter with me, and I'll be around, and I'm glad to test things or test your cell phones, anything like that.
Hi, I have actually two questions. I'm not living in a densely populated area, but I will notice that I still can pick up a Wi-Fi signal. And so I just wanted to know what your opinion on that was. And then also Wi-Fi in schools. There's I think I couldn't tell what it was, and I finally figured that out. I think it's called a WAN, W-A-N, wireless.
There's wireless access points.
Yeah, wireless access points. And so I just wanted to know if there's like a booklet or a kit out there that you can bring to the principal, or just to, because everyone in this area wants their kids like coding when they're 2, and it's, it's like it doesn't seem like it's not on anybody's radar that Wi-Fi in schools is an issue.
Great question. Okay, first of all, answer to your first question. People see that there are many Wi-Fi networks around, and they think they must have really high exposure. But it only takes a really small amount for you to get that signal. So generally, if you're in a single-family home, generally your neighbor's wireless router is not having a significant impact. If they've got a really powerful router and it's really close to the side of the house where you're at, then it's possible that it's having some effect. But generally, no. Wi-Fi in the schools is a really big concern to me personally as a parent. And It is a concern. And I have clients who are teachers who've been really affected by it. And they use commercial routers, which are even more powerful than the residential routers. And they're generally in most classrooms, from what I understand. And they can be, I measured one private school. They called me in, they were actually concerned about the power line. But I came in, and there was one spot where in the 5th grade little classroom, and I found one spot, and that where the exposure was about 500,000. And I really, it's very emotional for me when I see that kind of thing. I would say for the schools, as more and more parents become aware, I think that's how the change is going to happen. There's some really good letters on my website from doctors and from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine about Wi-Fi in the schools. The summary for the public bioinitiative report is a good thing to show the administration.
Thank you very much for your talk. It's so important.
Thank you. 15 minutes, 15 seconds? Seconds? Minutes. Thank you.
One thing is, in the literature, there's a lot of correlations between a person's sensitivity and heavy metal toxicity. And the second part is a comment in that I think a low-fat diet may not be proper insulation for the nervous system, and that could sabotage one's ability to resist this ubiquitous event that we're experiencing.
Yes. I work with many of my clients, and they see integrative health practitioners who help them with the diet, the advice in terms of the metal in their mouths. And these kinds of things all seem to help for people who have this severe sensitivity. I always tell people that my work supports the work that these integrative doctors do, and I just help from one piece of that. But yes.
Well, mine is really a small question, comparable. You mentioned air tube headsets.
Yes.
What are those?
So it's got an air tube rather than a wire.
Instead of a wire?
Yes.
And they have them, they are available to anywhere?
They're sold usually on websites.
I just looked last night. They're 29-something.
Yeah. I've seen it on several websites. I know rfsafe.com sells them.
Another question is, so you mentioned the sleeping quarters a lot, and if you unplug everything in your bedroom, or what is it that you do to keep safe? Or is it in your walls so you're just damned anyway?
What we do for electric fields is we identify which are the circuits that are affecting the sleeping areas, and then we identify, or how can those breakers be safely turned off at night. That's the only way to...
Oh, so the breakers of the house, the main ones. Okay.
And that can be automated. A switch can be put in, and that's how to reduce it down to generally safe to building biology recommended guidelines.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, is there a wired router that you recommend, and if so, where to buy it?
Great question. So I like the Netgear routers, and the reason I like those is they have an easy on-off button for the wireless, so that if in case you need to turn it on for some reason, you can just push that button. So the router is always on, but the Wi-Fi, you can easily turn that off and on. For most routers, you have to go online, put in an IP address, put in a password to turn it off and on, and that's just such a hassle. So that's why I like the Netgears. There's some routers that actually are made that have no Wi-Fi, but I had a client who she had no intention of ever using Wi-Fi, and then she wanted to download pictures, and her network wasn't fast enough, just the cell towers wasn't fast enough, so we just turned it on for a minute so she could do that. So I think that's what I recommend.
And do you know where you buy that? Because I don't think you can buy those at like Best Buy
Sure.
anymore.
Netgear is a very common. Just make sure most of them should have that little button on the side of it where you can turn the Wi-Fi on and off.
And you still recommend having the router off at night completely, to unplugged, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's better than having it off at night is better. The best is not using it at all, like always having Wi-Fi off.
Right.
And just, yeah. So, but having it off at night is better than not having it off at all.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two quick questions. One is, you said don't use the cell phones in your car or trains. What about my car? Your cell phone goes to the dashboard and...
Oh, Bluetooth. Great question. So Bluetooth, as soon as you turn on your car, if you've got Bluetooth, it's emitting a really strong signal. So for people who are, even if you're not using your phone, so for people who are sensitive to this, I recommend not having that on in your car. Different cars, some cars you can just turn it off at the dashboard. Toyotas you can. So I have mine turned off.
So, but is there a difference in the level of radiation with the Bluetooth as compared to just a car that doesn't have that in a cell phone?
Yes. So I've measured cars, when you turn it on, that Bluetooth in the driver's seat is about 1,000 microwatts per meter squared. So not insignificant. And you're getting that all the time as, when you're driving.
The other question is, I know you said it's probably best to turn the breakers off, but if you don't turn the breakers off, what about, the power strips, if you just have everything plugged in there and then turn the power strip off?
So that's better, but it's coming from the wiring in the walls. And so there's what called Romex, which is plastic jacketed wiring, which is what most homes are built with. And with Romex, electric fields emanate out about 6 feet into the room. I do want to make one thing here. I don't recommend that you manually turn off breakers repeatedly, and the reason is they're not designed to be switches. And so over time, they could wear out, and then they might not trip if there was an overcurrent situation, which could be a fire hazard.
Okay.
So there are solutions for this, and there's even fabric that I've had good success with, which is pretty inexpensive, which can shield against electric fields. And I'm glad to talk with, we're probably down to the last minute or so, but I'm glad to answer any other questions afterwards.
Another quick question. What about people that have pacemakers, or I myself have a cochlear implant, so I have a magnet inside my head.
I've heard that
are these EMFs going to affect my head more than other people, being that I have this magnet in there?
I don't know. I can't answer that one, but I've heard that it can sometimes affect pacemakers. For example, people can't go through the security at the airport if they have pacemakers, but I wouldn't know about the ear implant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'm a single mom with a son who's 14 begging for an Apple Watch, and he has used his money to buy every other Apple product known to man,
Yes.
and he carries his cell phone in his
Yes.
pocket. We battle constantly on this subject.
Yes.
And I think most people with teenagers will
Yes.
as well. Help.
Okay, so
I'm trying to give him the information, doesn't want to listen.
I hear your pain. I have twin boys who are now 22, and I went through that same issue with them. And
But now the Apple Watch has a cell phone on it,
I know.
the new one.
With my sons, they were when they turned 18, they said, "We're going to get it, and we're going to buy it ourselves if you won't buy it for us." And so I said, "Okay, I'll get it if you'll use this case, and you promise to turn it off at night." Do they turn it off at night? No.
The cell phone's not in his room at night. I
That's
won
good.
that battle, but he wears it all
It is-
day in his pocket.
I would say the case is good, and my sons will use the case. They like it. You buy a case that's specific for your particular phone, so they don't have to think about it, and it comes in different colors. My one son likes the white case. He thinks that looks really cool. So,
but arguments against the Apple Watch that you can get your kid to not wear one and not buy one, is there anything that you can show them or tell them, or evidence or proof? Or
I can't. You're doing the best you can. My sons, sometimes familiarity breeds contempt, and they sort of half listen to me. I think they kind of believe it, but we do our best as parents. That's all we can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned some simple things you can do to shield the EMFs or the RMFs. I'm not sure the correct term. So what would you use for a baby monitor, for example? And then my second question is, where could one go to be trained to learn to do what you're doing?
Okay. So the first one, quickly, I got my training through the International Institute for Building Biology and Ecology. And they have an excellent training program. And they have on-site, and they are in Santa Fe. That's where they conduct the on-site training. But you can go to the website. It's buildingbiology.net, I believe. And you can find out more about the certifications. And many people go to those seminars so they can learn just how to keep their own home safer. And then your second question.
The shielding, maybe for a baby monitor or anything.
So there's fabrics that you can buy, even like foil placed over it. But the trick is, if you shield it too much, it's not going to work. So you have to kind of play with it.
Okay, fabric. Thank you.
We got a baby monitor that we had to order from Germany.
Yeah.
But it only turns on when he makes noise.
Exactly.
So it's not shooting out EMFs all the time. It's only communicating with the other end of the thing when he makes noise, and we turn it on maybe once a month.
Yeah, that's the one I had mentioned earlier. You may have just been out, and I just discovered that, and so I think it's a wonderful solution. Thank you very much.
You had to navigate Amazon Germany to order it because you can't order it in the States. But the Google Translate, it works okay.
Real quick question. People with sleep apnea machines, have you done readings on those machines? Because I have to sleep with it.
Okay, so there shouldn't be any radio frequency coming out of those that I'm aware of, that I have seen.
Okay.
And by the way, for people who want to turn off breakers at night, there's solutions, even if you need to have something in your room where you have to have power. You can have a shielded circuit run into the room by an electrician so that you can turn off that breaker, and then you can plug the device into the shielded circuit. So how are we doing on time? We're out. Okay, so feel free to contact me afterwards.